Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bridging Science and Soul, where we discuss two different perspectives and find some common ground. So we have Dr. Stephen Brewer, who is a physician of many years with much experience, and he represents the science aspect. And we have his daughter, Dr. Elizabeth Brewer, representing the soul, who is an integrative psychotherapist. That's correct, right?
That is
Co-
correct, yes.
Cool. And so today we're going to be talking about science versus soul and what the differences in the approaches are to healing and medicine. So I'll just kick it off. What, from you guys' perspective, is the difference in the approaches of between these two paradigms? Let's start with let's start with you, Stephen Brewer.
It's interesting you say that in terms of how do I approach it just from a medical perspective and then from a psychotherapist. When I see a patient and I'm not looking at it what is their medical problem, what is their medical issue. I look at them as a whole person. And there's so many times their physical maladies are associated with what's going on emotionally with them. I never feel I can separate the two. A lot of times we'll go down the line, or somebody comes in with a severe sore throat. I swab their throat. They've got strep throat. I can give them some antibiotics and send them on the way. I don't need to analyze their relationship with their mother. Okay. And it doesn't, that's not going to be an important thing. Although, this is the interesting one. I remember when I used to work at the urgent cares right near where Elizabeth was going to school at the University of Arizona. I always knew when it was finals week because all these kids started coming in with strep throats, mononucleosis, bladder infections, and I always said, "Oh, is it finals week?" And they go, "Yeah, how'd you know, Dr. Brewer?" Well, because the stressors of doing all niners has now affected their health and the medical aspect. I've always got that in the back of my mind, what's happening or what's causing this. There are certain things, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, some major issues that I feel that have major things going on in somebody's lives can really be a huge overlay what I'm finding medically. I certainly use all my tools as a physician when somebody comes in with certain symptoms. If they're coming in, for example, with fever, I may get a blood count to make sure their blood count and see what's happening with their blood count. I may get a chest x-ray to make sure they don't have an infection in there. These are all modalities as a physician that I have or my tools that I have to try to figure out exactly what's causing that infection or what's causing that specific problem, and then I address it. But the emotional overlay is huge. I see it every day. People will tell me, "Gosh, I've had such and such going on for 5 years." So the first question I always ask is, "What happened 5 years ago?" And sometimes they can go pin it down to something that happened in their life, or it just happened these symptoms started happening about 5 years ago. I see it a lot of times with autoimmune diseases. I see people that have rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, a lot of the autoimmune diseases, because it's your body attacking itself, and anything that can potentially affect your immune system in a negative way certainly can exacerbate or cause some of these autoimmune diseases. I don't know if the word is it causes autoimmune diseases. I think it allows it to happen. It changes your immune system. I've had people that they may have genetically predisposed to get it, and then something emotionally or something really tragic happened in their life, and then they suddenly had the symptoms associated with the rheumatoid. So my bottom line again is, yes, I address every health issue, every problem from a medical perspective, but I never forget the psychological aspect of what's going on.
Interesting. So I'm hearing you it's impossible for you to separate the two. And even when there are physical uh problems, there's often some psychological or emotional context surrounding what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, and or just it may not be a traumatic or stressful event. It may just be changes in environment. This is going to sound really funny, but my dad was a country veterinarian. I don't know if you know this, Elizabeth, but it was her grandfather who unfortunately she didn't get to know because he died when she was just a baby. But he was a country veterinarian, and um, he there was this disease called shipping fever. Did I ever tell you about that,
Mm,
Elizabeth?
no.
Okay, so my dad would say, oh, a group of cow, we go out to a farm and says, oh, yeah, it's all shipping fever. And as a kid, I thought that was an actual disease. Well, it's not an actual disease, but what it is they'll have a, I don't know, a herd of cows in which they're sold at market and sold to a farm, another farm. So these farmers will get these, they're coming up and they're going to now raise the cattle for whatever reason, for dairy or for meat or whatever. And by just moving them from one safe place that they're familiar with to another, they end up very commonly with upper respiratory pneumonias,
Mm,
coughs, and stuff. And I go with my dad, and they're all coughing, all these cattle. And he goes, "Oh, did you just recently get this group of cattle from someplace else?" And invariably, he'll say, "Sometimes this is interesting. Sometimes it was only like 2 farms away, and then put them in a truck, bring them over, and now they're all sick." And so, just um, changing environment,
mhm.
changing routine, really upsets the immune system. And I'd
Yeah.
like to, kind of hear what Elizabeth thinks about that a little bit. But I think it's fascinating. It was called shipping
Mhm.
fever. And as a little kid, you go, oh, that's some weird disease. Well, it's just the cattle are being stressed because they're moved from one place to the next. And then they're very susceptible to getting infections.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear your, yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, what I'm hearing is displacement, and I feel that's where science and soul meet, where displacement isn't only about geography, it's about belonging. And I think about when people are uprooted, the body keeps searching for home, even if the mind tells us we're safe. And I see that in therapy all the time. Someone can be decades removed from the event, yet the nervous system is still kind of pacing the borders and still scanning for danger. And I know I wrote about this in my book, but the inner centuries never got the message that it's over, that the war was over. So many things to say because, Dad, you have so much wisdom and knowledge and experience. Um,
So
but
here's a question I have for you, Elizabeth. So, and I would look at it from a medical perspective in terms of this is called epigenetics, in which you can actually environment can turn on or turn off genes. Do you see these things as generational, going from one generation to the next? I think you talk about it a little bit in your book, a little bit, going from what you may be dealing with the genes from your grandfather going through World War II.
yes, and it can also skip a generation. And so I think I want to back up all the way, and that's a great question, Dad. Thank you. Um, when I sit with someone, I'm not just thinking about their mind or even their body, but I'm listening for their story. And also the story that maybe the mind, and I would say the mind has never been told. And so the body carries memory, culture, ancestry, identity. It tells the story, not Gabor Mate. We'll talk about Gabor Mate in a bit, but Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps a score. How someone learned to survive. So from a soul perspective, healing isn't about a prescription, erasing pain or fixing what's broken. It's about giving space for what's been hidden or misunderstood. And sometimes an emotion could be that, it could be a belief, or it could be a part of the self that's been waiting to be seen. And I think of the soul as the connective tissue between everything. So there's science, emotions, spirit. As you know, before we started this podcast, we were talking about spirituality, culture, and love. And so when we pay attention to it, we start to see that our symptoms aren't enemies, they're messengers. And the body is speaking a kind of, I know you're going to probably scoff at this, Dad, but poetry. And then my work is to help the individuals that I work with translate it, because we all have different ways of knowing. You know, my father, very logical, very science-based. And also he has a creative side. He won't admit it, but he has a creative side. And every one of them belongs. So when all the Dr. Richard Schwartz would say the parts, the voices can speak, that's when we start to heal.
Hmm. Would you scoff at that? That poetry, Steve?
What Liz is referring to, I am so basic and so very square individual. I understand there are so many people that absolutely love poetry, and if it makes them feel good, and they feel that enlightens their spirit. Me, I just want somebody, they don't have to go through that whole four lines. Just tell them you feel happy, and just like in fact, I'm going, what was the hidden meaning on that one? And I just because I am pretty basic at times, and I understand there's so many people absolutely love poetry, and I don't ever want to stop poetry. I think it's so important for so many people, like my daughter. But I'd rather have you just give me a couple lines and tell me what you need and or how you really feel about something. That's just a personal choice.
Hmm. It's interesting because maybe this is a slight tangent, but I guess poetry is a way of like exploring and expressing what one's feeling inside, right? And Elizabeth, as you were
Mhm,
talking about listening to your body, um, and I imagine in your experience, it's probably difficult sometimes for people to say exactly what they're feeling without going
mhm,
through the whole arc of uh,
mhm,
expressing different things. So
mhm,
I'm interested in how you guys experience that in different approaches, because I'm sure too in medicine, people might find it difficult to say exactly what's going on.
mhm.
So, uh, yeah, what do you have to say about Elizabeth? And then Steve, I want to hear your take on it.
So I had a teacher once who said that poetry is the language of the soul.
Hmm.
And it's how meaning, we use the word remembers again, remembers itself when words or data can't.
Hmm.
And what's so beautiful to me is that science is starting to show that, well, say what poetry has always known, that memory isn't just something, Zale, as you were saying, that we think. It's something that we carry. And so epigenetics shows that trauma can leave, correct me if I'm wrong, Dad, molecular signatures that pass from one generation to the next. And so grandfather's war, a father's silence, they all shape how our genes then express themselves. And science describes it as, is it methylation? Is that correct?
Yes, that's a CH3, and it attaches, it can turn on or off a gene.
Hmm.
So on a soul level, it's inheritance in verse. So when I say poetry is the language of the soul, I mean it, I hear it, literally. Like the body writes poetry in our DNA. You said, okay, the lines, the 4 lines, there's a line about survival, of vigilance, of endurance. And then healing means learning to read those lines, to bring what's been encoded in stress and silence back into our awareness and our choice. So yeah, the genome carries history and the soul carries meaning.
Hmm.
Maybe, sort of.
What'd you say?
Maybe sort of.
Maybe sort of.
Say more. Say more.
No.
Yes.
I want to go back to, well, I don't know what I'm going to really, how I can take that, but I think I want to go back to your question about how do I access their stressors, and how do I access my patients? What if they, are they telling me the real story? Are they going to be open to me, right? And that's a real difficult thing for a lot of practitioners. But the more you can access what's their deeper thoughts, their feelings, the better you're going to be able to treat them or help them. My technique I've used forever, and it's kind of like, I feel that when I see a patient for the first time, I don't suddenly say, so what's your ailment, right? And because it's just like, I want to know who they are a little bit. I want to know where they're from. I'm fortunate in that I have a practice in which it's a national and somewhat international group of patients. And I've not been fortunate to be, well, I don't know if it's fortunate, I just have not traveled that much internationally, but I have traveled a lot nationally, and I can usually get a sense when somebody says, I'm from Iowa, I'll go, oh, I know something has happened in Iowa. If they've been in Michigan, I'll say, oh, my daughter went to Interlochen for her arts academy. I mean, and I try to meet them to say, hey, you're a real person. You're not just a medical item here. You're not patient number 4 today. I want to know who you really are. Because especially, we have such diverse individuals in this country, of course, internationally, that if you understand, for example, if it's a Midwesterner, and this is very stereotypic, okay, you can get a sense, but they're a little bit more relaxed. They're not really they want to know you a little bit more. Now, if I'm dealing with my patients from New York City, they kind of want to let's go. Okay. I mean, I'm here at Caney Ranch where I work. I'm here to relax, but it's a little bit more fat. And I think it's really important to kind of try to meet them where they are. And the whole idea is I'm going to now be able to access their concerns a lot better once they feel more comfortable with me. And I think and that whole intro time may be 2 to 3 minutes max. And then I have the beauty where I work, like Elizabeth and her, as a psychotherapist, most psychotherapists spend at least an hour with a patient. And most people with medicine, they have 10 minutes or maybe 15 if you're lucky. I am so blessed where I work to have usually an hour. A short time is 30 minutes. And so I can actually get them much more at ease, and they're much more open about telling what's going on. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is just, it's been done for years and years and years. And I'm going to go back to flying airplanes here. Okay.
Mm.
There was, I forget, gee, there's a wonderful book out, and I can't remember his name right now, who wrote it. But he basically talks about they're trying new planes in the 1930s. And this plane takes off and crashes and kills everybody in the plane and right after takeoff. And they kept searching and trying to figure out what was wrong. I think a lot of us have heard this and found out they forgot to turn the flaps in the other direction, to turn an on button. Okay. And it just nosedive and it crashed to the ground. So that was the beginning of doing a checklist. Okay. So if you walk by the cockpit on your way when you come into the plane, and if the cockpit door is open, you're watching the pilot and co-pilot going through their checklist. So they make sure all those things is it. So my checklist is the basic history and physical that has been brought for decades through medicine. And I think it's really important because I systematically go through and I will go off in tangents, but I'm not going to miss things. I want their whole, okay, so I've got to know you, so then my next question is, why are you here with me? Is there a specific reason? And then delve with that. Then I get a sense of that. And then I go, what hospitalizations, what surgeries, what medications, do they smoke, do they drink, what's their family history, and then go through all the different organ systems systematically, rapidly. And so I'm not missing that stuff. And now that's my way of being able, and then they'll say it like, they'll call like, oh my gosh, out of nowhere, oh, I forgot I had chest pain last year because I'm asking
Mm.
that question. And because many times that over the years, people, and I cannot tell you how many people have told me this later. I got into the doctor's office. They asked me a couple questions. I told them one thing. I got in my car and went, oh, I forgot to tell them why I was really there. And it's so frustrating. And I hope in my systematic approach that we're not going to miss that and get in and delve into that. See, I avoided your poetry question.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned you're blessed enough to spend longer times with your patients, right?
Mm.
And I would argue you are getting a bit into poetry because
Mm-hmm.
you're creating more context, more story. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
tell you, "Oh, I'm from the countryside of Ohio." You imply certain things from that versus them telling you exactly, you know, something that you would imply. So, you
Don't give
know.
me too much credit there, Zale. Don't give me too much credit.
But I am interested in Elizabeth's perspective on that, what I just said, but also uh the comparison between, the usual approach of a doctor just being 10 minutes with a patient
Mm-hmm.
and then out. Yeah, what do you think about that, Elizabeth?
Well, it's like this small little fragment,
Yeah.
this small little glimpse. I get this little glimpse. Um, and I do feel blessed to be able to sit with my clients, my patients for an hour or two a week.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, just like the little glimpse. Um, I'm reminded of what my father said earlier. What is the name of the cows? The cows
Shipping fever.
shipping fever.
Ship.
Shipping
They
fever.
ship from one place
Shipping
to the
from one
ship.
place to the next.
Yes.
Well, and you were talking about these different sections of land in the United States. I want to be specific when you're talking about the Midwest and New York, it's the United States. And most of us live on land that was taken, and that taking lives on, not just historically, but also physiologically, because the body feels what than culture denies. And there's a restlessness or think about the cows, a rootlessness, a kind of that word from earlier, the spiritual jet lag that comes from living on land that maybe we don't fully acknowledge. And you talked about the whole person earlier, and I'm curious, how can we be a whole person on stolen or silenced land or ground? Because the nervous system, thinking about the cows, the nervous system knows when something is off. And even if the conscious mind, as human beings, can't name it. So that's kind of just what I'm sitting with.
So you're asking a question that we've asked since the revolutionary days, about indigenous people, and we've taken their land, and it's all true. I don't have any answers for that, Elizabeth. I wish I had answers. Maybe we could, as a nation, all figure that out together. But I think what we can do as a father, as a doctor, as a person in the community, is, to me, is acknowledge that fact instead of, that happened in the past, so it doesn't apply to me. But I think until you acknowledge it and sense what actually is happened and realize that, I think at that point, that's part of the healing in terms of part of allowing us to move forward, part of our ability to get to a better place. And so, because I think about that a lot, because as you know, your father loves history, and I love studying about, especially the founding fathers. And of course, we all have our flaws. And here's Thomas Jefferson writing probably one of the most impactful documents ever in the Declaration of Independence, and it's for white men, okay, who have land. And here he's talking about freedom. But it doesn't mean that that was a bad document. It was a great document. But we need to acknowledge that it wasn't, you've got to carry out what you preach, right? And so for that, we're getting away from medicine here. But anyway, I think, again, acknowledging that fact, acknowledging what we did with slavery, acknowledging all that, and I think is part of the healing process ultimately.
When you say the word we,
So you're going to get deep on me here, aren't you?
Do it.
does the
Do it, Elizabeth.
who is the we? Is it the white privileged male? Is it the
Well, I think when we means people that put a blind eye to the past. Okay.
That's helpful. That's helpful to name. That's helpful to name. And I think that's, I mean, if we're going to get to the core of science and soul, I mean, if I recall correctly, science was inquiry into the unknown at its core. And we've decided that science now, and I'm saying we collectively, as a way that I think well, there are a number of different intersections of culture that hold science as a facts. This is the facts. This is real or not real. But science being the inquiry to the unknown. And you just said that the we is those of us who have turned a blind eye. So we have not passed down maybe poetry or images or art that maybe holds the stories that have not been able to be documented because of the the times because of safety.
One thing that's coming to my mind is as you talk about uh, the arts and things, being acknowledged, also medicine too, right?
Mm.
Uh, because uh, I'm interested in what Steve thinks about this in terms of more traditional practices of medicine um, in native cultures and stuff, as well as how those things have shaped modern medicine and whether or not there is acknowledgement on how those things have shaped modern medicine and whether or not that could be an avenue for, um, more recognition and acknowledgement.
So you're asking the multi-million-dollar question here. You got to historically, let's go back a little bit in my training and what my practice medicine. When I finished medical school, my residency in 1982, there was no such thing as alternative therapy. Okay. It was just you go to the doctor and that's your doctor. Okay. And there were places that were doing it, don't get me wrong, but the majority of the time I was trained, I didn't even know. I mean, I heard somebody threw some needles in you. That was called acupuncture. I saw it in the old days when we used to look at an encyclopedia for information. I saw pictures. And it was then I started seeing patients that what I had learned in my traditional, well, back then we didn't call it traditional, we said this is what medicine is. What it was a Western approach, there were patients that I was unable to help. And that was one, so I thought, gee, what else can I do to help these people? Because, like, for example, at that time, especially when it started rolling into the 90s, for example, it was then that we all were really pushing more narcotics. That was when the beginning of the OxyContin debacle. And, they came out with studies showing we'll have less pain medication if you get ahead of the pain. And of course, it was wrong, and these people got very addicted. So, but fortunately, I was smart enough to think that doesn't make sense. And I really believe in scientific studies, but this one was I just couldn't buy it. And of course, I was one of the few times in my life I was really right. It was like it was wrong. These people, we had more addicted. So I'm seeing these unusual medical issues or problems that I can't solve it with either medication or surgery. So, and at that point, we were just scratching the surface with mind-body medicine. And then the other thing that was happening at that time was my patients, not from my direction, but from their own position of exploration of their own health, were all starting taking all these vitamins, these supplements. They were seeing naturopaths. They were seeing traditional Chinese medicine. They were going to Ayurvedic practitioners, and I had no idea what they were doing. Okay, and so I finally started looking into this, and that was one of the reasons I went into integrative medicine, because integrative medicine, which started in the 90s, came out and said, okay, from a traditional medical perspective, what are some of these other alternative therapies? And it should be my job as a police officer of other medicines, help direct my patients, or at least tell them, hey, this alternative therapy, I haven't seen anything bad. Maybe there's some good from it. Okay. And and then I actually studied acupuncture before I studied integrative medicine. And Elizabeth used to fall asleep watching my videotapes on acupuncture at night. This is a funny story. So she used to drive her preschool teachers nuts because she'd go in there, and with traditional Chinese medicine, there's a thing called the 5-element theory. And after multiple questions, you can determine whether this person is wood, fire, earth, metal, or water. And based on your element, um, you approach them from a different acupuncture perspective. You approach them differently from if you use any kind of how you eat, um, or if you need any kind of herbals. And I did not know. Elizabeth would just sit beside me when I was watching these tapes and stuff and trying to learn to do it. And I just thought she was just hanging out. Well, I get a call from her preschool teachers. They said, "What's this wood fire stuff?" She's going around asking all of us teachers, "What's your favorite color? What's your favorite season?" And we're going nuts. What is she doing? And I said, "Oh, she was listening more than I thought." So it was fascinating. And I don't do much acupuncture anymore, but I utilized my years of studying it and looking from, like you were asking, outside the box, these alternative therapies. And this is actually more rolling into Elizabeth's realm, which you'll probably be shocked that I'm saying this, but they talk of more of the alternative therapies. And in their world, they're not alternative. That's their mainline medicine. But we'll suffice to say, non-typical Western medicine. They talk about energy. They talk about emotion, who you are in terms of, for example, with people that have they're mostly predominantly wood element or more anxious. Okay, people that are more metal are a little sadder. And so, we do that. I see in a lot more of the outside of the Western medicine, they really bring into the fold the emotional aspect, I think more so than we do here. Do you remember what wood was, Elizabeth?
Of course I do. I'm more wood. I'm more wood.
Does that bring anything up for you, Elizabeth?
Well, I'm hearing the language used, which is not surprising, the us and them, the othering. And I think about earlier, Dad, when you said that those of us that choose to ignore or to are blinded by the truth. And I think about, well, we're already even separating in our language, it's going back to poetry, right? uh, Us and them, me and them. Um, and earlier you described yourself as being being a box, being a square. And so I wonder, and yet you've just demonstrated you going back to school to study integrative health, integrative medicine just shows that you're not a square, Dad. I mean,
So
you
are
can
you trying
call
to say that
yourself a
you're
square.
trying to say there's hope? There's hope?
But I feel like you are blinding yourself from all the work that you have done. I mean, even listening to me and listening to my perspective throughout my life, which has always been a little bit more artistic. Um, I would say that you're at least your edges aren't as sharp and hard as they may you may feel or think that they are. Um, because what is felt, and Zale said this earlier, what is felt by your patients is not the yes, it's not 10 minutes. You get to sit with your patients, but you also hear the whole story, which is not just a box. Um,
You have to know their story the best you can. Sometimes it takes a couple of visits. I'm going to ask you a question. I think it comes up here, Elizabeth. And speaking, like you say, you have patients maybe twice a week. Um, I don't. Do you feel that you know, 2 times a week with one person for an hour each time? That's a lot of time. Do you feel that what happens? Do you feel like you get deeper and deeper each time with these people? Or do you feel like you just keep or is it a combination of it depends on the individual, or do you just feel like there's other issues and other issues and other issues? But that's a lot of time to spend with a therapist once or twice a week, which obviously they're getting something out of it because they want to do that with you. If I was seeing a patient twice a week, I'd probably be scratching my head. Now what do we do? It's kind of like I'm going back an old story with you. Is Zale? This is funny. So I used to read Elizabeth a bedtime story, but I always fell asleep halfway through. And then she would get up, and she was like a little kid. She'd get up and go down with her mother and said, "Well, I've got dad asleep. Now what do we do?" So I think in terms of um, that to me, I think is kind of amazing that you're able to carry on this incredible conversations and be with these people on, once or twice a week, every week. I mean, I mean, do you even think of that?
Well, the word think is interesting. I'm focusing on words again. I would say I feel the affect. I notice and can hear the changes. And it's not about that word fixing anymore. It's about staying. Making one small pocket of, use the word coherence, in a world that has forgotten to be whole.
Yes.
Well,
It's always about expanding ourselves for those who want to expand themselves.
and
And
that's
I
the key. That's the
I
key.
honor
You
I
have to
honor
want
what you're
to.
able to do to help these people continue to expand themselves. I think I try to deal with the issues, the problem, and address it as quickly as I can. But there is a piece of me that might be a little bit of what you do, and that's the preventative piece. And I'm always trying to make sure that, okay, we've got to solve this problem, but what can we do to prevent 15 problems down the line? I'm sure it depends on your patient, Elizabeth, but what percentage of time do you focus on future versus dealing with past issues?
Well, when I sit with someone for an hour or two, I cannot change the systems that shaped them or undo the histories that live in their body, but I can keep them company inside it. And I can listen, but I can also help them listen. So it's interesting, you talk about future, and it's interesting because I'm the next generation from you, Father. Um,
You see the gray? Anyway,
but the future is maybe not tomorrow or the next day, but it's what is the seed that I can plant right now in this moment that will take shape in the future? And what am I passing on? What am I working through that I will choose not to pass on to the next generation by opening up my eyes to something that maybe I closed my eyes to in the past, or it was passed down with eyes closed. So now I am taking the courageous act to open up my eyes to it and acknowledge it. And then I don't pass it on. It's easier to close our eyes. It's more difficult to open our eyes. And so I have learned, not perfectly, but to sit with that, sit with the discomfort and be with it. And it's uncomfortable. I don't know who said growth is uncomfortable, but I would say, in the United
That's kind of a
States.
Buddha thing, right? What you never
We said we weren't even going
never
to talk
advance till
about
you
religion
heal.
here today. We talked about spirituality.
Yeah, you never
You have
learn.
mindfulness. You could say, yes, mindfulness, a way of being with suffering. Um, and I feel that culturally, I mean, I grew up within the cultural water that says, here's Band-Aid. Let's fix the problem. And so it is not, it goes against I want to say it goes against my nature, but I actually feel like truly my nature is to be with, to see suffering. I feel like that is our nature, and that we have been trained, programmed to not look at the suffering, to not be able to sit with the suffering, and to just try. And I mean, I noticed that impulse within myself of wanting to fix, of wanting to heal. Um, Something as simple as I was just walking the Camino de Santiago with Dr. Richard Schwartz, and a group of high impact leaders. And one morning for breakfast, I was sitting down and um, one of the women said, "Oh, I just drank coffee and now I feel anxious." And the first thing I said was, "Oh, here, have some nuts. Maybe that'll make you feel better." And she looked at me and she said, "I wasn't looking for a fix."
Ooh.
And I went, "Oh, I'm not going to cuss on here," but I went, "Crap." There, without even being conscious or aware, I wanted to fix the problem. I wanted to make her feel better because I was uncomfortable. I wanted her to feel better so I could feel better. And so learning to sit with suffering, that is one of the hardest things in this profession. And it's hard.
And those people that make the leap to actually sit with the suffering are those people you absolutely love. But there's such a fine line, and I've seen it over my 45 years of practicing medicine, is when you give yourself too much, then you're burnout and you can't continue to be a healer. It's a very fine line that I think everybody has to figure it out. And some people go over the edge one way or the other. You see people that are dealing in whatever form of medicine, whether it's cardiology, oncology, in which the mortality rate is very high. And you think these people are very cold, and I don't think they're really cold. Not all. There's many incredibly caring people. But the ones that you go, why, how can they be cold and you go, they're just, it's their own shells that they're trying to protect. It's a tough job for everybody in the healing profession. They have to find that happy medium in which you're showing compassion, you're with the patient, they feel that you're compassionate, they feel that you are truly concerned about them.
Mm.
And because that's part of the healing. Because I've sent in the old days, I remember I would send people to my old teachers who I thought were really brilliant, but I didn't realize some of them were kind of cold. And I would send them my patients that may have some unusual that
Mm.
problem that they need to see a specialist, subspecialist. And the patient would come back and I go, "Gosh, what did you learn?" They go, "I didn't want to listen to them because they didn't, I don't think they were listening to me. And they just
Mm.
wanted to tell me what to do." And so, but I want you to tell me what to do, Dr. Brewer. And it's like, I'm not the specialist, but because I have been listening and this other person has it. So it's so important that, the person at least has the patient feels you're listening to them. It's really big.
Mm.
Can I give you one last story here before we hang up? I want to tell you,
Yes.
I don't know if you've known this story about your aunt. Elizabeth's aunt Deborah was a nurse for, I don't know, 40 years. And she ended up, was on the heart transplant team at Mayo Clinic. And she was well known throughout at Mayo as one of this top nurse. But one of the beautiful things she did, she worked as a circulator and had patients going back and forth between recovery and going into surgery. And what she would do is that her patient, I don't know if you heard this story, and I heard this from others, she would come up to them and say, give her name. My name is Deborah Brewer. And um, get ready. This is what you need to do. Here's your checklist. Now, I'm going to be with you the whole way to the operating suite. And I'm going to be the last person you're going to see. And I'm going to be the first person you're going to see when you wake up because I'm here for you. I cannot
Mm.
tell you how profound what an impact that had to be on these patients, knowing, because most people go into surgery, they don't know anybody. Who are these people? They try to be nice to you, but having this one familiar face right in your face, I think it was a huge issue. And I would love to have seen a study for those places that had somebody individually bringing them in, bring them out and see what their outcome is versus just somebody randomly, I'm going to take you to the operating suite. I think we're getting close to the end here. Zale, do you have any other last questions?
No final questions, but I love this discussion because
Mm.
we said science versus soul, but I didn't hear a lot of verses in this
Yeah.
discussion. It seems you both do incorporate a holistic approach to the things you do and realizing that connection is very important and central to all healing. Um, and yeah, that last story is very interesting. I'd love to talk about familiarity in maybe a future
Mm.
episode. Uh,
Hmm.
Yeah.
but yeah, do you guys have any final remarks to make?
Well, when I think about science and soul, thank you, Zale. I also think about something you brought in earlier, Zale, indigenous wisdom, indigenous medicine, because the first medicine that I know that um, I've studied is, before hospitals and theories, there were people listening to the elements, to wind, to water, to one another. And healing was a relationship, not a profession, not a box, not a square. And those traditions remind us that knowledge lives in the body, in community, in land. And you don't own it, you tend it. And you give back when you take. And that feels like science and soul together, the observation of life and the honoring of it. And modern medicine inherited much of its science from indigenous healers, plants that became pharmaceuticals, methods that became research. But what is often left behind is the reverence, the sense that every cure is also, feels for me, relational. It's a relationship. It is that science and soul.
My last piece is that hopefully the people who are listening to this will find those practitioners that are listening to you. And
Mm.
one simple way is um, this technique that the practitioner should be doing. And it's very simple. Elizabeth learned this probably in Psychology 101 is mirroring. So what that amounts to, and most of us heard of this, is that if you say, "Gosh, my back hurts and it's been excruciating the past 2 weeks," the doctor said, this has been going on for 2 weeks, you know they've heard you. And if the doctor's not doing that, or the therapist is not doing that, just said, I just want you to know, did you hear me? It's been going on for 2 weeks, not 2 years. Okay. So it's just every once in a while to make sure you get that reinforcement to know that both sides are hearing each other. And that's my last piece.
So are we hearing each other, Dad?
I always listen to you. The day I tried to put a diaper on you, I listened to you.
That's awesome.
I
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say before we wrap up, I wanted to say, Elizabeth, congratulations on your book.
Oh, thank you.
For everyone listening, definitely is this visible? No, it's not visible in my background. I'm holding your book up, but
Oh, there you
There,
go.
there.
there,
It's
we go. The Purpose of
oh,
War by Dr. Elizabeth Brewer. Do check it out.
and I
It-
actually think that's quite symbolic, Dad, because it's revealing. And the book is about what conflict reveals in the
Don't get
body
too heady.
systems
Don't get too heady on me, Elizabeth. Come on.
and history.
Okay. Good talking to everybody.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
See you next time.